Over the weekend, there was a massive intensification of the protests against Iran's ayatollah regime, which led to the regime shutting down the internet access in most of the country in order to create an information blackout. However, reports leaked out of live fire being used against the protesters in several cities, resulting in hundreds of fatalities, but that hasn't stopped the protesters from coming out into the streets with chants against the regime and a refrain heard over and over again: "We're not going anywhere." The regime is trying to downplay the scope of the protest, but is also threatening to execute traitors and those who assist them, while on television they are broadcasting a war orchestra, while American and Israeli officials are holding discussions about possible sites for attacks. They are also discussing the possibility that Iran could launch attacks against Israel and the United States bases in the entire region in order to distract attention from their own internal problems. Israel's intelligence echelon is watching Iran closely to stay ahead of these threats, and other regional military forces are also on high alert. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. So, is Iran on the brink of a revolution against the Revolutionary Guards and its regime? TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani stayed up all night gathering information for us so he can give us an in-depth look at the situation. So you want to stay tuned for that. One thing that we've learned in the last 24 hours is that the Revolutionary Guards, which are the backbone of this regime, have been doing something very new. They are now actively hunting for ordinary police officers who refuse to fire on protesters, other Iranians, even as doctors and hospital staff all over the country are saying that they are being overwhelmed with a number of wounded people being brought to them for treatment. US President Donald Trump warned that the United States will strike with force at Iran if it fires on protesters. They also added that in Tehran they want freedom, and the United States is ready to help. These words are accompanied by reports that serious planning is being made for the United States strikes on Iran's military facilities, possibly with the Israeli participation. Encouraged by this, enormous and unprecedented numbers of Iranians, from children to the elderly, are taking to the streets of the major cities in the country, and this is despite the violence that is being used against them by this regime. For their part, the Revolutionary Guards continue to insist on a narrative that it's all a conspiracy by Israel and the United States, that their own citizens still support the regime, but have been fooled into thinking that they don't by these US and Israeli agents, and they also claim to have captured and executed some Israeli Mossad agents. Now, with everything that's been going on, we're left with many questions. Will the situation in Iran lead up to a particularly dramatic scenario, a wider regional war, or perhaps something else entirely? While the talks with Saudi Arabia are stuck, Israeli officials are examining a new scenario: the fall of the regime in Tehran and the renewal of ties with whatever regime emerges there to replace it. If Israel renews its old alliance with Iran, which we had before the Islamic Revolution in 1979, will we even still be interested in Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords? And once again, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us all the details, so stay with us because you don't want to miss that. And back in Israel, we're also facing the possibility that the ceasefire deal in Gaza will soon collapse, as Hamas is refusing to disarm, and the IDF is preparing new plans for resolving this issue. Even before that happens, the IDF was compelled to act in the Gaza Strip over the weekend, hitting Hamas operatives in the west of Gaza City, while the Palestinians reported a ring of fire. And this follows an incident where terrorists fired at IDF forces in the area where the terrorist organization is searching for Ran Gaveli, the last Israeli kidnapped fallen soldier. His remains are still in Gaza. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 827 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we start, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. this is the time to fight back against all the anti-Israel propaganda that all the extreme Islamic organizations and other people are spreading around the world. Help us by praying for the people of Iran and by sharing the truth. So around the world, people are following the massive protests in Iran, which in recent days have been gaining momentum and are now being perceived as a tangible threat to the regime. And over the weekend, it was reported in the British Telegraph news portal that a senior Iranian source claimed that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei ordered the Revolutionary Guards to suppress the protests, and that he even raised the country's alert levels to a level higher than it was during the war against Israel. A number of airliners also cancelled flights to and from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Protesters have spoken of severe violence by the security forces, but alongside that, they also expressed hope that the ayatollah regime, which has ruled the country since the revolution in 1979, is nearing its end. On Thursday, following the call of the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, it was reported that masses of Iranians took to the streets across the country. That same evening, in an attempt to suppress the protest, the regime cut off the internet and also the phone lines in Iran in a dramatic move that creates difficulties for the ongoing coverage of the demonstrations. And despite these difficulties, reports have leaked out, and TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani was up all night to gather some information for you from what's happening in Iran. So over to you, Mati.
Right now, streets across Iran are boiling again as protests push into a second week, and the regime is responding in real time with force and shutdowns. In multiple cities, protesters are out while regime security forces, including the Basij and the Revolutionary Guard, move to break crowds, detain people, and cut communication. This is not a slow political story. This is a live internal confrontation unfolding in front of our eyes. So here's what's at stake at the moment. If Tehran feels its grip slipping at home, it may try to reassert control not only through crackdowns inside Iran, but by escalating outside of Iran, towards Israel, towards US targets and interests in the region, or through its proxy networks. After the emulation by the E-12 days war that IRGC lost to Israel, that's the Operation Midnight Hammer back in June, the timeline of the demonstration starts with economics, because that's how this wave is described. On December 28th, our reporting ties this unrest to economic pain, inflation, currency collapse, and anger spreading through daily life, including the bizarre environment. From there, the protests did not fade after a night or two. Our collected reporting describes them continuing and escalating, reaching what is described as a 14 days of unrest up till now. And the longer it continues, the more it becomes about power, not about prices. In the meantime, Thursday, January 8th, is described as a major turning point. Our sources connect that day to a public call by Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince, urging people to flood the streets. After that call, the street language hardens. Chants described in the material include "Death to the dictator," referring to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Another chant appearing in the reporting is, "This is the last battle. Pahlavi will return." Alongside the chants, the symbolism shifts too. Footage now describes in our reporting, including appearances of the pre-1979 Lion and Sun flag, a direct cultural challenge to the Islamic Republic's identity. At the same time, the regime's response follows a pattern it has used for years, but with modern tools. First, it tries to shut down coordination. On Thursday night, January 8th, our reporting describes a major internet and phone disruption, a complete blackout. That's not a detail on the sidelines, it's an operational move. When a government cuts internet and phone lines, it does two things at the same time. It makes it harder for protesters to organize and move, and it makes it harder for the outside world to confirm and can know what's happening on the ground. Numbers become harder to verify, videos become harder to date, claims multiply, and the fog is not accidental, it's part of the regime's control altogether. Now, behind the scenes, this is why our material is careful about what can be stated firmly and what must be labeled. There are core points in our reporting that remain steady. The protests are continuing for roughly 2 weeks and are described as escalating. The regime cut communications. Israel is monitoring and raising alertness. But exact death counts, exact arrest totals, dramatic hospital stories, and individual tragedy accounts must be represented as reports because the blackout is designed to block verification of those stories. By Friday, January 9th, our reporting includes reports of hospitals overwhelmed and heavy injuries, with a fear of being identified. That fear matters. In a crackdown, hospitals are not only places of care, they can become pressure points, where the state watches who shows up, who is connected to who, and who is afraid enough to stay at home. The material we collected includes specific claims that must be clearly labeled as unverified reports. A report carried out in this monitoring describes 70 bodies brought to a hospital in Rashid, and allegations that families were asked for 7 billion reals, about $7,000 to release the bodies. The point for our audience is not to lock onto a single number as proven. The point is to understand the allegations, that the regime's coercion is not only bullets and arrests, but also intimidation, information control, and financial pressure. Now, in the meantime, other reported figures appeared in material, also needing careful language. One figure was collected describing at least 51 deaths attributed to a human rights reporting channel that was cited in coverage we monitored. Other claims go higher, but under communication shutdown, those numbers are difficult to confirm or verify independently. And that uncertainty is part of the story. The same applies to arrest. The number 2,277 detained appears in our notes, including deaths like 166 minors and 48 students, and it can be used only as reported, quote unquote, but not verified. And this is part of the plot by the Iranian Islamic government. At the same time, Saturday, January 10th, is presented in our material as a shift from street scenes into state posture. The reporting says the regime raised readiness, with a comparison meant to show scale, described as a higher readiness than during the June war with Israel, referred in our material as the 12-day war 6 months ago. Whether viewers remember every detail of that June conflict or not, the comparison does one job. It tells you, the audience, that the regime is treating this as a strategic level threat. And our collected reporting says Khamenei is reported to have ordered IRGC-led lockdown and crackdown on these demonstrations. Our sources indicate that Khamenei is reported to have ordered an IRGC-led crackdown. Now, the IRGC is not regular police. It's the regime's backbone, built to protect the system. Now, the Basij, often used in internal suppression, is part of that same enforcement ecosystem. When those forces are emphasized, the regime is signaling it will pay almost any internal price to prevent momentum from becoming irreversible on the streets. Now, let's bring Israel into the frame, because the meaning on the ground is very significant and it ties to what's happening on the streets of Iran. So our sources are very, very clear and explicit. Israel is monitoring closely and raising alertness, watching not only the protesters and the protests, but what Tehran might do if it feels trapped. That threat is described in operational terms. External lash-out could come through missiles, through proxy warfare, through cyber attacks, or strikes against US bases and Israel at the same time. This is not a prediction. This is a posture logic on behalf of the Iranians. When internal stability is threatened, regimes sometimes manufacture external confrontation to rally supporters, distract the public, and project strength. And when it comes to Iran, this has been their playbook for many, many years. Now, at the same time, Israel faces a messaging problem that our reporting highlights very clearly. Israel can express moral support for the Iranian people without owning the protests. Because if Israel is perceived as directly or directing events, Tehran can use that claim to justify higher repression or harsher repression and to frame protesters as foreign agents. This is why the clean framing matters. Support the people. Do not hand the regime a propaganda weapon. Now, at the same time, our notes are also, and our sources are indicating, that psychological pressure is in the air. Israel is reportedly receiving threats and texts like, "Look to the sky at midnight," with unclear credibility. Even if the source is uncertain, it reflects the atmosphere around the crisis. An atmosphere of intimidation, of fear, and the sense that escalation could come all of a sudden. Now, hand in hand with that, the United States enters the story in the loudest way possible, through public messaging from President Donald Trump in the last 48 hours, as reflected in the material we've collected for you. So the tone is direct. Iran wants freedom. The US is ready to help. Our sources are reporting that also there's a description of warning attributed to Trump that if the regime starts killing protesters, the US would hit them hard. And then there's a third layer. We've heard reports that are tracking described initial internal discussions about potential strike options, while emphasizing two qualifiers that also appear in those sources: no sign of an imminent strike and no reported change in force posture. That combination is the story. Strong deterrent language, unclear action, very big messaging, but an uncertain execution on behalf of the US government. So now we arrive to Sunday, today, January 11th. Let's frame it as the momentum question, because protesters that fill the streets can still fail to change power if they don't sustain. For a regime to fall, demonstration movements often need something more than highly motivated and nightly demonstrations. They need sustained strikes in strategic sectors like oil and transport. They need cracks inside the security forces, or a long enough period of unrest that breaks the regime's ability to control daily life. For a regime to survive, it needs loyal law enforcement, IRGC and Basij. It needs fear and the ability to cut coordination and visibility. And that's exactly what we're watching unfold in front of our eyes. Protesters trying to keep momentum while the regime tries to shorten the time window through shutdowns, through arrests, and through intimidation. So tonight the tension sits on two fronts at the same time. Inside Iran, the question is whether this becomes sustained, with strikes and staying in power, or is crushed under the force of isolation. Outside Iran, the question is whether Tehran, feeling pressure, chooses to lash out at Israel at the US interest, or through its proxies to change the subject, the topic of conversation, and project strength. And here's the final tension line. The longer the streets stay hot, the more Tehran may feel it must prove control, not only with crackdowns at home, but with igniting pressure abroad. So the question that leads into what comes next is this: are we watching a regime that cracks under its own people, or a regime that survives by killing and then exports the fire outward towards Israel and the entire region?
Thanks, Mati, for the accurate information. Our hearts are with the Iranian people. And before we continue to what's happening in the Gaza Strip and also to the IDF's preparations against the Hezbollah terrorist organization, I want to make a brief comment on all of this. For the last 2 years, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu mentioned in many of his speeches that one of his goals is expanding the Abraham Accords. Until now, Saudi Arabia was his top priority along with President Trump's. But the prospects of this have faded, and it seems that it will take a long time for it to be possible to return there. But in recent days, the discourse has changed, and even though this is a sensitive and is likely being discussed in a limited forms only, it emerges that the new target is none other than Iran. Yes, that's right. Normalization with Saudi Arabia is more or less off the table for now, but normalization with Iran is being seriously discussed. This turn of events would have been unthinkable just a short time ago, and it of course depends first and foremost on the Iranian people and on the success of the protesters bringing down the regime of Iran. And meanwhile, different elements in the Iranian opposition are already serving today as a pretext for a future peace agreement with Israel, if and when it becomes practical, to the point of turning the arrangement into a strategic goal. Therefore, all of us, together, we need to pray for the Iranian people to succeed in freeing themselves from the cruel Islamic rule of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran. We will pray for peace, and you can help us by sharing these videos with as many people as possible and by also praying for the situation. And also, please tell me what you think about all of this in the comment section. And speaking of sharing good things with people, I want to share something that's happening here in Israel, because as 2026 begins, the need in Israel is still very big. War doesn't end when the siren stops. Families are still rebuilding. Reservists in the IDF are still serving. Survivors still face long days alone, and children still go to bed hungry. At Meir Panim, we have a job to do, and they call it Itchadshut, which means in Hebrew, renewal. It begins quietly with a fridge that hums again, a backpack packed for school, or a Holocaust survivor smiling over hot soup. Over the past year, Meir Panim helped 100 100,000 displaced families begin rebuilding their lives. They served 2.6 million meals, supported over 100,000 IDF soldiers, delivered 500,000 care packages, and renovated hundreds of homes for families and Holocaust survivors in need. Each meal, each visit, each act of kindness helps restore steady ground, and as the new year begins, you can help give those in need a new beginning. Just visit blessed-israel.org to give now. Every donation is tax deductible, and every gift helps bring renewal and hope to Israel. And now, we will move quickly to what's happening in the Gaza Strip, because the situation of Hamas is closely related to what's happening in Iran. In Tehran and also in other cities in Iran, the streets are burning once again, causing Hamas to look eastward and also to worry, because as Tehran is distracted by its domestic crisis, there is less money and less assistance that is available for the IRGC to send to their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. However, Hamas refuses to fully disarm, and despite the shrinking support from Iran and the demand placed by the conditions of Phase B of the American ceasefire plan, the IDF has already formulated a plan for a new ground operation in areas that remain under Hamas's control within the Yellow Line area. But underground, at least according to sources that are involved in the discussions, there is currently no immediate entry, and Israel is allowing time for the diplomatic track to advance. And with all of that in mind, there is the problem. While talk continues about moving to Phase B of the ceasefire plan, Hamas is exploiting the lull to rebuild its power. According to assessments cited in the reports, the organization is rebuilding tunnels that were destroyed. It's appointing new commanders and also trying to recreate a routine of governance. The money for all of this comes from collecting taxes on goods and also on services on the Gaza Strip, from cash transfers through a network of intermediaries, and also from aid coming from Iran. And this is according to the Israeli assessments that were brought. Hamas has about 60,000 rifles and about 20,000 fighters left, and the cash flow enables salaries and partial rehabilitation of underground infrastructure. In parallel with Hamas itself, a quiet leadership drama is taking place. The internal elections for the position of chairman of the political bureau are taking place at a sensitive time, and the regional involvement is clear. According to the information presented, Iran prefers Khalil el-Khaya as a candidate who ensures continuity to the military line, thanks to a close tie with the military wing and the resistance axis, including Hezbollah. So the IRGC not only finances Hamas, it also tries to shape who will make the decisions in Gaza on behalf of the Palestinian people. And on the ground, the signs of renewed tensions are everywhere. In the last week, IDF forces struck about 40 terror targets to assist the forces and to clear the area. On Saturday, 3 terrorists were identified crossing and approaching the forces. One of them stole military equipment and was eliminated after fleeing back across the line. In another incident in the north, in the Gaza Strip, 2 terrorists who crossed and also endangered fighters were eliminated. In the meantime, Hamas also tried to show presence with live fire, including a rocket launch that was carried out from the Gaza City area, but the launch failed and fell inside the Gaza Strip. It fell near a hospital. The IDF carried out a targeted strike on the launch point, and in response, additional strikes continued. In addition, 8 launch shafts, 2 weapons production sites, and 3 weapons depots were targeted. And behind the scenes, the real discussion concerns the question of who will disarm Hamas and what the day after will look like. IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir has expressed doubt in the ability of an international stabilization force to actually disarm the terrorist organization, and asked for clear guidance regarding control of the Gaza Strip after the disarmament. He even expressed reservations about an Israeli military government, but presented it as an option if no alternative is found. In parallel, obstacles were mentioned that are holding up the diplomatic move. For instance, the Rafah crossing is closed. The last hostage, Ran Gaveli, has not yet been returned to Israel, and countries are hesitating to send their forces to join the stabilization force as long as Hamas is armed. And in the end, it goes back to Washington. In reports from the United States after a meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump said that Hamas must disarm very soon, otherwise there will be hell to pay. In another report, it was claimed that Trump and Netanyahu even agreed on a deadline for about 2 months for disarmament, including practical steps such as destroying the tunnel network. If that is the direction, then the message to Hamas is sharp: either disarmament or a return to a broad ground maneuver. The bottom line is clear. While Iran is burning from within and Hamas clings to money and tunnels, Israel is holding a ground plan on the shelf, and the White House is signaling that there will be no more patience. The question now is this: who will blink first? Hamas, which will agree to disarm, or the political echelon, which will give the order to go back? There's one thing that you don't have to wonder about, that here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. And it is very important that you stay tuned to what's happening in real time and help us share the truth with as many people as possible so that we never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, we're switching our focus to Lebanon because on the morning of Thursday, January 8, 2026, the Lebanese army issued a festive announcement. South of Lebanon has been disarmed of Hezbollah's weapons. That's great news, right? But there's one small problem. It's a lie. In Jerusalem, an immediate, cold, matter-of-fact answer is heard to the empty statement that this is not disarmament. It is storage of Hezbollah's weapons in order not to confront a terrorist organization. And in the background, the IDF is already talking about a broad military operation that will come if the lies and nonsense from Lebanon's internationally recognized government continues. In the Lebanese army's announcement, it was said that the plan to concentrate weapons in the hands of the state has entered an advanced stage, and that the goals of Phase A were achieved effectively and tangibly south of the Litani River. The exception, they claim, is areas still under the IDF's control, which, for the record, are very tiny, so no one should take this calm very seriously. I've been there. At the same time, the Lebanese National Army talks about handling tunnels and unexploded ordnance, and about an overall assessment that will determine the continuation of the stages of the Homeland Shield Plan. In response to all of this, the Israeli Prime Minister's office stated that the arrangement requires the full dismantling of Hezbollah's weapons, adding that this is an encouraging beginning, but far from sufficient. While Hezbollah tries to rearm and rebuild infrastructure with Iranian assistance, this is not a diplomatic remark, but a message that prepares the ground for the next move. And behind the scenes, the IDF points to a repeating pattern as the Lebanese army arrives at the points that it was sent to, collects weapons, but does not destroy them. According to information published in Israel, some of them are kept in warehouses in Lebanon as an interim solution in order not to enter into a direct confrontation with Hezbollah. The problem with that, from Israel's perspective, is that a weapon that was not destroyed is a weapon that can return to the field very quickly if and when a decision is made to do so. That having been said, Lebanon's internationally recognized government is trying to present this as a strategic movement. For that, we need you, as ambassadors of the truth, to share our content with as many people as possible, hit the subscribe button, and most importantly, never forget to pray for the situation. Prayer is very, very powerful. I believe in it. God is listening. So let's unite in prayer for the situation, for wisdom to our leaders, and for the peace of Jerusalem.